Hi friends, how are you? I'm Nicole and this is Crimes with Cole. So hello. How are you guys doing today? I hope you all are having an amazing day. I hope you've had a wonderful week and are ready for the weekend and another crazy crime story. Now, today, I want you to imagine that you met a man who you thought was perfect for you, or a woman, and you thought they were so perfect for you. They checked off every box you had. And then your fairy tale came crumbling down when you found out that half of it was all lies. This is exactly what had happened to April Kauffman, which tragically ended in her death. April Kauffman was born as April Christine Fazia on October 27, 1964 in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Her father was mostly absent, leaving her mother to raise her and her 4 other siblings. But when April was only 11, her mother made the difficult decision to place her other 4 siblings into foster care, leaving her as her mother's only responsibility. April was raised mostly by her grandma in her early childhood years. Her mother seemed to attract toxic relationships with men who had no business being around children. She faced some other hurdles in her childhood and really just faced challenges that helped mold her into who she had become. When she was 17, she gave birth to her one and only child, a little girl, and named her Kimberly. And because her mother never gave her that motherly support and unconditional love, April made sure to give that to Kimberly. She made sure to be the mother that this little girl deserved and not the kind of mother she had grown up with. She had dropped out of high school and started working right away. She was able to get her GED and then went off to cosmetology school to become a hairdresser and eventually opened up her own salon. And while doing that, she had also opened up her own catering business. She was absolutely driven. If she had set her mind to it, it was going to happen. Not only was she beautiful looks-wise, but her personality was beautiful too. She truly stood up for what she had believed in. She didn't just fade into the background. She had a voice, and it was going to be heard, especially if she was passionate about it. And people loved that about her because she was passionate about some really good causes. She had created her own radio show in Atlantic City. And on this radio show, she expressed some of those feelings she was passionate about. And one in particular was better treatment for veterans. I think we can all agree that veterans risk their lives for us, then they come home, and some of them are not provided with easy access to services or resources they may need. And anyone who has dealt with the VA knows they like for you to take the long route sometimes. It certainly is never a quick process with them. And that's wrong. That's wrong in my opinion, especially for those men and women who have put their lives on the line for us to have all the luxuries we have in this country. And this is exactly how April felt too. But people respected her for it. So many people respected not only her in her personal life, but her professional life as well. They really loved talking and listening to her and what she had to say. She was very captivating when she spoke with people. She just gave you this sense of belonging when you engaged in conversation. Like, it really drew people in, and you could just tell she truly was a good person with a good heart. She didn't put on this mask. She didn't pretend. She was just genuinely a good person with good intentions. One of the things that April did every year was on Thanksgiving, she would open up her doors to her own home and invite the recruits from the U.S. Coast Guard station in Cape May for Thanksgiving supper every year, because, some of these men and women weren't able to make it home for the holiday, or maybe they just didn't have family. But April invited them for a home-cooked meal because, nobody wants to be alone on Thanksgiving. But again, she also felt that they deserved it, and she wanted to give that to them. Now, through one of the charities that April worked with, she had met a man by the name of Dr. James Kauffman, who went by the name Jim. April had been divorced twice already, so I think it's safe to say she knew what she wanted in a man, and Jim was everything April could have ever dreamed of in a man on paper. He was a veteran of the Army's Special Forces and shared a passion for fast cars and motorcycles with April. So the two quickly fell in love and ended up getting married around Valentine's Day in 2003. And from the outside looking in, like, they seemed to kind of have it all. You had April, who was this radio host doing great things, and she married this endocrinologist who was also a veteran in the Special Forces and was well respected in the community as well. And Jim could come on to April's show, which was so wonderful to have a husband that's supportive, but can also give you insight on their perspective on a topic you are so passionate about. Jim had served 2 tours in Vietnam, so like he's seen and experienced a thing or two, right? Well, Kimberly had to do a project for school. She needed to interview a veteran. And Jim said, sure, but don't tell your mother. So he proceeds to tell Kimberly about how he experienced this brutal attack in Vietnam. Everyone in his platoon had been killed except him. The only way he was able to survive was licking the water off leaves while he was waiting to be rescued. And while he was waiting, he somehow managed to collect all the dog tags from those in his platoon so he could give them to their families. Like, it's a rather heroic story, but was it true? Kimberly was able to see her mother and Jim's relationship on a different level than most. Kimberly was extremely close to her mother and considered her best friend. So she saw how controlling Jim was with her mom, how he would do these small, immature acts that most of us would just brush off, but they're absolutely disrespectful. And if your spouse does this to you, you should tell them to stop, or you should stop doing them. He first controlled all of April's finances, all the money she worked for. Jim had a say on what she could spend it on. He would turn the lights off in a room while she was clearly still doing something that required light, not pick something up that she asked him to pick up, do things as if she wasn't there, like those types of petty behaviors. He was extremely jealous over people who gave her attention and not him. He needed to be the center of attention at all times, and it really irritated him how people were just enamored with her. They truly found April to have this energy about her, and Jim hated that. There was a time that April had showed her neighbors where Jim put bullet holes in the living room walls after a heated argument that they had had. Now, Jim loved his guns. He was a self-proclaimed tough guy. He was egotistic. His image was a huge deal to him, and it was hard for him to accept that his wife was on the same level as him. He made money, so did she. He had this image of helping others, being a hero. I mean, he's a doctor, but so did April. She helped people in other ways. She was giving back to the community too, and people adored her for that. But the one thing that Jim could not stand was when people would call him Mr. April Kauffman, because that indicated that she was the head of the household and ran the ship, not him. And I think a lot of men would have a problem with this. I can't say I'd ever want my husband to be called Mr. Nicole Kissy, but Jim also went after a woman who had her ducks in a row and was driven and goal-oriented. She wasn't going to let anything knock her down. She was going to climb the mountain put in front of her with or without you. But again, Jim cared more about his image than he did his marriage. Not only was he egotistic and selfish, but he was also a liar. He had been lying about being a veteran for over a decade, which just devastated April. It would devastate anyone who trusted you. But April also felt very strongly about veterans and their treatment they received. That's what her entire radio show was about, that she had brought him on multiple times. So imagine people finding out that she brought her husband on to this radio show to speak from a veteran's point of view, and they find out he truly isn't one. that he just lied about it to get her listeners. The trust would be gone and loyalty would die down. It would demolish her career she worked so hard to build. And it wasn't just about losing listeners. Yes, that's a huge part of it, but it just left April feeling betrayed by him. She respected him for all he had done and been through, and then she finds out it was a lie. So ultimately, she wanted a divorce, but Jim did not. Why? Because that would mean April got half of his money, and that was just something Jim wasn't willing to part with. It's reported that Jim's net worth was $4.6 million. So when April comes to Jim and tells him she wants a divorce, he says, no, absolutely not. You aren't getting half of my money. I would kill you before I allowed you to have an ounce of my money. In fact, I'd go nuclear on you if you ever try to leave me. Now, April tells her daughter all of this one day at lunch, but April, being the headstrong woman that she is, tells Jim that if he doesn't grant her the divorce, then she will expose the pill mill he is operating out of his medical office. And for those of you who don't know what a pill mill is when a doctor will write a prescription for a medication and give it to someone who does not need that medication, but that person will go get the prescription filled and either use the prescription for themselves or sell it for a profit. One of Jim's number one customers for his pill mill was a biker club called the Pagans. Now, the Pagans is a motorcycle biker club who partake in some illegal activities and have in fact been linked to organized crimes. Do all motorcycle clubs partake in illegal activity? No, some of them are great and do great things, but the one we are speaking on today will be the Cape May chapter, which do partake in illegal activities. Now, if there's one thing you need to know about motorcycle clubs, it is this. The one rule you shall never break is telling on one another. You don't do it. I don't care what it is. You don't tell on your brothers. They protect one another. They support one another on a level that many people don't get to experience in this lifetime. So regardless of the crime, you just don't tell on one another. Now, in the Cape May chapter, the president is a man named Andrew Glick. But before Andrew Glick became president of this chapter, he was taught everything he knows by a man named Fernandez, or Freddie. Freddie was somewhat of Andrew's mentor when he first joined, and the two of them became extremely close over the years, closer with each other more than with other members. So back to April threatening to expose the pill mill that Jim was operating. Jim did not like this, so he came up with this brilliant plan that he would ask the Pagans, Freddie specifically, if he would take his wife's life for $50,000. He did not want her taking his money for one, but also he didn't want her exposing the pill mill because then everyone would be at a loss and everyone involved that was making good money from it. Freddie thought this was brilliant because he was in a position that he could delegate this task to someone else that did not have as much superior as he did. He wanted to keep $40,000 to $45,000 himself and then have another member complete the task at hand for $5,000 to $10,000. And at first, no one wanted to complete this task. I couldn't imagine why, but they didn't. For months, no one wanted to. Until one day, Freddie found someone, a man named Frank. Now, Frank is not a part of the Pagans. He's just a junkie they provide supplies for. When Andrew found out about this, remember, Andrew taught Freddie. When he found out about this, he was like, this is a dumb idea. This is not going to work out having a junkie complete this task. He won't abide by the one rule every pagan knows to abide by. But Andrew, he didn't really care either way. He was aware of the plan, but didn't interfere with it because he wanted nothing to do with it. So he just kind of left Freddie to proceed on with delegating this task to Frank the junkie. And on May 10th, 2012, Frank had completed the task he was given. He had entered April's home, and just before 5 a.m. that morning, he had shot her twice. once in the elbow and once in the rib cage, which then traveled through her lung and pierced her heart, ultimately taking her life. Where was Jem? He was proceeding with his regular morning routine. He had left before Frank had got to the house, and then he stopped off at the local Wawa and continued on to work. He did, however, call the bird keeper, Billy. He never called Billy, though. So when Billy received a call from Jem to go over and check on April that morning because he hadn't heard from her, he thought it was rather strange, but did so anyways. And when Billy arrived, he found April lying on the bedroom floor. He immediately rang 911 and then called Jem to let him know what was going on. This is when Jem himself rang 911 and made his way to the house immediately. Detective Michael Matoli was one among the first to arrive to the house and interview Jem, and noticed that Jem kept changing his story. Jem first said he ran upstairs to check for a pulse on April, and then he changed it. And he said that he ran upstairs, but he didn't check April's pulse. And then he said he went upstairs and didn't touch April at all. Then Billy says Dr. Kauffman never went upstairs at all. The neighbors had even said that Jem was waiting outside the house the entire time until he saw the police turn on to his street. At that moment, he decided to run into the house as the police were pulling up into the drive. He runs outside, crying hysterically, throwing himself down on the front lawn, just really giving the performance of a lifetime for the officers. But this tragedy really left everyone asking, who would want April gone? She truly was kind, sweet, and loving, and everyone really did like her. She didn't have any enemies. Kimberly immediately said Jem. If you wanted to find April's killer, they just needed to investigate Jem. But Jem wasn't named a suspect. In fact, he wasn't named a suspect for a very long time. They had surveillance footage of him at the Wawa during the time of April's life being taken, so they just left it at that and said it wasn't him. And for years, the case went unsolved, and Jem had the nerve to tell Kim, that's how it's going to stay. April's funeral was held at Beth El Synagogue in Margate and had more than 500 people who had attended. Everyone had so many amazing things to say about her, and Kim, bless her heart, sat there next to Jem all day, watching him put on a front about how he is Mr. April Kauffman. And although April was gone, Kim never let her memory die. She made sure that for months, even years after her mother passed, that she kept her memory alive. Kim continued to fight to find her mother's killer, and Jem just went on living his life. A year after April's passing, he started auctioning off her stuff and had gotten married again. And while everyone grieves differently and heals differently, a year after your wife was taken from you, it seems to be rather soon, in my opinion, to be married, but a lot of people do it. And not to mention, Jem had no desire to discover who did this to April. He just wanted to cash out her $600,000 life insurance policy. But Kimberly refused to let that happen because she just knew that Jem was the one behind all of this. She just had to prove it. So 2 years after April's death, Kimberly decided to file a civil lawsuit against Jem. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit against him, which meant that there would be a disposition that Jem would be required to answer questions under oath at. And during this questioning, Jem slipped and said that the pagans may have something to do with April's death. Now, the strategy behind this was to get all the evidence that they could and basically lay out everything and give it to the investigators. So all the investigators had to do was just go after Jem in a criminal case and not a civil one. One thing they discovered was Jem's call log. He had been calling a burner phone up until the day of April's death and then just stopped. Never called it again. In 2017, 5 years after April's death, a new prosecutor took on this case and was ready to go after Jem. He just needed some concrete evidence. Luckily for them, the FBI had already been looking into Jem for unrelated charges. Apparently, Jem had committed some insurance fraud. So on June 13th, 2017, feds and local authorities had shown up to Jim's office to execute a search warrant for reasons related to insurance fraud. However, Jim did not know this. So he comes out of his office with a gun, threatening to use it on himself, shouting he wasn't going to go to jail for something he didn't do. And they weren't even there to arrest him. They were literally there to just get documents that they needed from his office. But now they are arresting Jim and had given him a psych evaluation. They didn't just find incriminating documents. They had found $100,000 cash, which they suspect is related to all of his avenues of bringing in money from the side. And they found a lot of illegal guns. So he was not charged with anything pertaining to April, but he was charged due to the illegal guns and the documents that they had seized. Now, even though there was no reason for the judge to deny bail, he did. So Jim was stuck behind bars, and that gave Kimberly and her attorney to have the upper hand and also get him charged with April's murder. Now, remember, Jim originally said in his disposition that he thought the Pagans had something to do with April's death. Well, they also discovered that Jim was prescribing multiple members of the Pagans whatever it is that they wanted. They kind of figured that over the years, like a trust was formed between the members and Jim, and this is when Jim figured out who to hire for this job he wanted done. The detectives are piecing all of this together, and they knew it was going to be a challenge to get one of these members to talk, because remember, you don't rat out a brother, right? But somehow the detectives got lucky because Andrew, he didn't abide by that rule. Andrew had put it in his mind years ago. The day after April's murder, when it was broadcasted on the news, he had decided that they were done for. The Pagans were done for because, remember, they didn't have a pagan complete this task. They had Frank the Junkie do it. But the days went by, and then the months went by, and then the years started going by, and Andrew sort of thought, maybe they were in the clear. Then Frank the Junkie died from, a way that junkies usually die from, and good old Dr. Kauffman was the one who prescribed those to him. Was that intentional? I mean, possibly. But it really got Andrew thinking they were in the clear until Jim got arrested. Once Andrew found out about Jim's arrest, he had called the prosecution's office and asked if he could come down and pick up his medical records. They had been seized and he wanted them, so they're like, sure. Once he got down there, the investigators tried to question him about April's murder. But of course, he wasn't budging. He wasn't going to say anything. So they let him go, but told him before he had left, it would be in his best interest to work with them and not against them, because they're going to figure out who took April's life. He left and continued on doing what he did, and shortly thereafter, on November 1st, 2017, his house was raided and piles of pills and stacks of cash were found. And Andrew was arrested and charged with a ridiculous amount of charges pertaining to this, which was great for the prosecutors. They told Andrew they'd cut a deal with him, and at first he said no. He sat in the county jail for 6 days and then was released on bail. He was facing up to 40 years on those drug charges, and after a couple days of thinking real hard about it, Andrew called up the prosecutor and told them he'd take the deal. So on November 16th, Andrew went in and gave a recorded confession, but they wanted more. They wanted Andrew to wear a wire and go talk to Freddie about the murder. And even though Andrew was hesitant about doing this, he put on the wire and had 14 meetings with Freddie to discuss the murder of April. And Freddie absolutely thought it was strange that Andrew was even bringing this up. It had been how many years? Everything's done and over with for the most part. Like, why are you bringing it up now? And he continued to tell Andrew how he was one of his best friends. He trusted him more than anyone he knew and would ask Andrew if he was wearing a wire. But Andrew would assure him he wasn't. So Freddie never spoke upon April's murder, but he did talk about a loose end they needed to tie up because of April's murder, and that was Jim. Jim was currently in jail for those guns and cash they had found, but Freddie knew Jim could cave and say something, so he wanted to have him killed while he was in jail. He told Andrew his plan to go about doing so and who he was going to contact to have the job done. And police actually have surveillance videos of Freddie meeting with the people who they believe would have connections to the inmates in the jail that Jim was in, like who would have completed that job. So Andrew told Freddie, no, don't worry about it. I'll have it taken care of. I'll have my buddies and the Mexican cartel do it. They'll inject him with some fentanyl. Like, don't worry about it. It'll just take a few for me to orchestrate. And because he was wired, obviously Jim was going to be fine. Andrew just had to convince Freddie so Freddie wouldn't actually have the task of taking Jim out done. So on January 9th, 2018, Freddie was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder and racketeering. And that same day, Jim himself was charged with the murder conspiracy and racketeering. It was discovered that Freddie was sending many people to Jim and his pill mill, and Jim was making close to $11,000 per visit. Can you imagine? That is a lot of money. So needless to say, Freddie and Jim had to be sent to separate jails while they awaited trial because Freddie would absolutely have Jim killed. But on January 26, 2018, Jim ended up taking his own life before his trial ever began. In doing so, he left behind a 6-page letter stating that he had no involvement in April's death, and she was, in fact, the one who introduced him to the pagans. Not that it matters. On September 17th, 2018, Freddie's trial began, and many people testified against him, one of which was Andrew, and another was a man named Joseph. And Joseph was the one who drove Frank the Junkie to April's house to carry out the plan. And a few other pagans had testified against him as well. So once everything was said and done, Freddie was guilty on all charges and sentenced to life plus 25 years. As for Andrew, he received no jail time, and all of his charges were dropped in exchange for his cooperation, which I don't know how his life carried out, like breaking that cardinal rule of ratting on a brother. I feel he probably made a few enemies. But that is all I have for today. You guys will have to let me know what you think. And until next time, please remember to be safe, and I will see you then. Bye.